Would you like some?
I
Stop
want.
on my.
Ready? I'm going to call to order the April 18th meeting for Environmental Matters Committee. For the record, all the members are in attendance. And I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So
Or
move.
I'm sorry, we have agenda first.
Approve the agenda, yes. So move.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Next up, approval of the minutes. Any motion to approve the minutes?
Move approval of the minutes as
Second.
written.
All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And getting right into legislation, we have O-2-22, mooring permits forfeiture. I'd like to invite Ms. Bellis forward and anyone else who would like to speak to this. And I think if everybody has had a chance to review, there have been some revisions that were sent around by, I think Ms. Leonard sent out the revisions that I think Ms. Bellis worked on with the Maritime Advisory Board and the Law Office. And they look good to me, but do you want to provide any kind of context, either of you, to some of these changes that are proposed? Does everybody have the amendments?
I have
Take a look at
amendments 1 through 3. Is there?
I think that's it, yeah.
Well, you're not talking about the advisory recommendations from the MAB.
Well, the amendments, I think, incorporate some of the concerns from the MAB, the recommendations. I did invite the chair or representative to this meeting. They have a meeting tomorrow, and they're going to be discussing this, but I told them I think we need to move this out of committee. I think it's been about 90 days. So I told them we could bring up any remaining concerns they have at the regular council meeting. But so anyway, do you have any context to the amendments
Sure.
you'd like to?
Ashley Leonard, Assistant City Attorney. So the revisions came about after a meeting between myself, Harbor Master Bellis, and Chairman Lomax, who is the chairman for the Maritime Advisory Board. We had a meeting sort of to discuss concerns that had been brought up by that advisory board, as well as the harbor master, as well as some of yourselves. And so this was sort of these amendments are sort of a collaborative effort to sort of address everyone's concerns to the best of our ability. We did send them to Chairman Lomax, so I think it's been a month or two ago, so he should at least be aware of them. But we'll hopefully be at the meeting tomorrow night and see if we can get any more feedback. But we're hopeful that this sort of is a good compromise between the competing concerns.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, did you have anything you wanted to add? Ms.
No, I just said, we're happy with this, and we think that it will help us do enforcement with the intent of that Title 15 section that talks about demonstrated need. We think it's good, and we understood some of the concerns, so I think what we've come up with is reasonable.
Yeah, and thank you for putting this together. Let me see if I can bring up the red line version that was sent out. Let's see here. This is it. So, wrong one. So the red line version you'll see on page 1, towards the end of that page, changes it so that the permit holder needs to provide advance written notice to the harbor master if there will be any disuse of their mooring permit that exceeds 30 days, right?
Correct.
And so, there can be no single period of disuse greater than 70 consecutive days. And this is as amended. And I think that addresses some of the concerns that we heard before from public and the Maritime
It's just
Advisory Board.
notice, not approval.
Right.
Which is just a little gentler. And the other thing we did do, I think, which was Chairman Lomax's, I believe, idea, is that we defined permitted vessel, because what we don't want happening is they take the main vessel away and just put like a dinghy there as sort of a fill-in to sort of loophole this. So it's focusing on the actual vessel that has the mooring application, not any.
And I would say that's important too, because there would be some secret subletting probably.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And also on page 2, it states that if there's a period of disuse that is more than 70 consecutive days, the permit's considered void, and presumably the city can do what we want with that. I guess we'd issue a new permit to the next person on the list. So that is, I guess, the 3 main things that these amendments do, right? Are there any questions from the committee? I see Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is consistent. I was at the Maritime Advisory Board, and this seems consistent with what they talked about there. And I talked with Mr. Lomax afterwards, and again, I think this is consistent. Some of the concerns were some of the mooring holding people talked about taking their boat either north in the summertime or south in the wintertime, and this gives them provision to make notice that they're going to be gone for a longer period of time. The one thing that was talked about at the MAB, and I'm curious about as well, I don't see in here, and I think I heard there were some complications. I'd like the idea of the harbor master, if people are notifying they're going to be away for an extended period of time, being able to rent from the city the use of that mooring during the time when people are away. And that would be additional revenue from those mooring buoys. And I don't see that here, and there probably are reasons why.
I could speak to that, and Ashley might want to chime in, but essentially when you lease a mooring from the city of Annapolis, you're responsible for the care and the upkeep. And so if I pay to have a brand new shackle and chain put on, and then the city leases it to someone who doesn't, I could argue, doesn't take care of it, then I may not feel excited about paying $1,000 for the repairs. So I think it gets into that, and there's some other reasons. It gets into some sticky stuff that could happen, I think.
So that leads exactly to my second question / observation. If somebody, and we know there are several, you've pointed that out to us, who are not using their mooring buoy and we take it back, do we have to reimburse them, for example, the inspections fees that they have to pay or repairs that they make, or the double helix anchoring system that they had to pay to put in?
No, I mean, the permit is void at essentially for them breaching or, violating a city code. So we couldn't charge them going forward for any more, but it's essentially at their risk that they didn't comply with an easy notice provision.
In Title 15 actually specifies that they would lose those annual fees.
Right.
There wouldn't be a reimbursement.
Yeah,
So thank you for those 2 clarifications. Those were the things that I heard listening to the MAB, and they seem to be happy with these amendments. So I would be willing to offer a motion that we recommend favorably to the City Council, the ordinance 02-22 with the 3 amendments.
I'll second that. I'd like discussion. And well, just a question. Is there an option for a shorter lease period?
There isn't, and there hasn't ever been a request for that. In all the 5 years I've been there, no one has asked for that.
Well, could that be because they just assumed that when they leased it, it was for a year and they could go and come as they chose? Because we're trying to get to, I think, the problem with people leaving it for an extended period of time.
For the price that we give, we would not have enough labor to continue to re-execute contracts for each of those annual moorings, or if we did monthly moorings. That would be problem number one. Problem number two, again, would be the maintenance, keeping up with who had it last and who has to maintain it. But on a more practical level, what I would say is in Maryland, from my experience, boating season is really only about 5 months long. And so if I need a place to keep my boat, I wouldn't be interested in something less than an annual. I wouldn't expect that to happen.
Well, aren't we trying to address a problem, though, with people leaving the moorings?
So what I would say is that's about 2 or 3 people. And in my experiences were people that didn't have the boat on there for 4 years, in one example. So what we're trying to do is make sure that people that want to go for a month and a half sail can do that. But we want to make sure people can use that mooring in a way that allows them to use their vessel as they would like. But I would not say as a blanket statement that we have a problem with people just not wanting to be on the mooring for a full year. They actually do want to be on it for the full year, but they want the freedom to go if they want for a reasonable long sail. That's my perception of what the desire is.
Yeah, I would add that the problem is not people who leave for a couple of months. It's people who are just either putting substitute vessels in there or dinghies, or who are just leaving empty for beyond a year period is what we're really trying to capture.
Okay, and
Because the problem is you keep renewing. So unless you have a way to sort of void it out, they get automatic preference to renew. So we're not trying to capture the people that are like moving around within a year per se.
okay, so there's a problem we're trying to address.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say the problem was just to try to make the intent of this particular section of Title 15 enforceable. And the intent is that you need to have a demonstrated need, which means you use the mooring enough that that's kind of where you keep your boat. And the way that it was written before made that awfully hard to enforce. So this, in a nutshell, I would say that was the intent of this revision.
I guess what I was getting to was, and maybe it's a different issue. I thought we were talking about people who leave their moorings to go off around the world and come back months later and their mooring sits vacant for 2 months, 3 months, or whatever.
Maybe this can help. So if that's the kind of person I am, if I'm going to be all over the world with my boat, then what would be appropriate is a transient mooring for me. So maybe I want to stay on a city's transient mooring for 2 weeks, and you can do that. We have 76 of them. And then you can go on about your way. But you wouldn't be holding this annual mooring, so the 35 people on the waiting list that really want it as an essential home for their boat, they wouldn't kind of be mad saying, no one's ever on that mooring. So if you really want to go all the time, then a transient mooring would be what you would be after.
Okay, so there's another option.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
One further
Yes, Alderman.
bit of discussion, if I may. The other thing that I brought up actually at the MAB, and I haven't seen it in the budget, but another thing that we could think about, and I want to ask if this is feasible, is more mooring buoys, more fields, so we can increase the number of, we have that list, that waiting list that people have been on for a long period of time. And so one of the things we can do is to get the handful of people who are basically abusing the privilege, that gets maybe 5 people off the list. But if we have 40, or 35, we have 30 some odd people who are still waiting and have waited for a long period of time.
So, yeah, so I have two things to think about with regard to those questions. The first is we make a lot more money on a transient mooring, and we do turn boats away every weekend lately because our transient moorings are full. So that's the first thing to consider. The second thing is that, yes, indeed, we have thought about putting more moorings, whether they be transient or annual. And we actually constructed 2 schematics with GPS coordinates where we could add 9 moorings in Spa Creek, and I don't think we ever really nailed down what we might want to do in Back Creek. But Ward 1 residents were very upset about that idea, and it got scrapped when the community was very vocal about not wanting that. We have since revisited that for two reasons. One is St. Mary's is putting in a living shoreline, so they're going to be required to move 6 of our transient moorings, and those are now going to end up where we would have wanted to put more. So we're actually running out of space altogether in Spa Creek. And then we're also running out of space altogether in Bat Creek because the Maritime Museum is putting in a new pier, and that means they have to move 5 moorings. And those moorings are going to go to just about, as far as I can tell, the only place that we have left for those moorings. So when we extend some things on our shorelines, then we narrow down where our moorings can be. So in my view, with these 2 projects on the table, there won't be room for any more moorings. We're only going to be able to relocate our existing moorings to stay in compliance with our grants.
So thank you, that answers my question. I did get a complaint from someone who is on Spa Creek complaining about somebody being moored too close to his property. I was not particularly inclined. If there's somebody moored too close to your property and they're making a nuisance of themselves, like a lot of noise or something, but just because they're in your front yard, I don't think we can honor that kind of request. I think it's more important to have moorings available, but your answer, as I take it, is because of other factors, there isn't a lot of room for more permanent mooring buoys, and secondarily, if we had room for more buoys, you would rather make it available for transient because we make more money. That's one reason. I would like to have more room for transients because we'd like Annapolis to be a desirable place that people can come to because there's mooring space, not be turned away. So that would be my prime reason, but I accept both of those answers.
So given I think the need to get more moorings, can you explain, it's a bit of a tangent, but what's the connection, is there a connection between mooring locations and the harbor lines and that issue, which I know, I think planning and zoning's looking into right now? Is there a connection between those two in terms of allowing space for moorings?
So I think maybe if I paraphrase what you're asking me, you might be saying, if we do setbacks instead of a harbor line, will there be more room? Is that?
Well, I'm just wondering, because I know part of the issue with the harbor line was that I think in some cases they were maybe too far out into the main channel. So I'm just wondering if into the navigable waters. And so is that something where we should be looking to almost pull back the line so we have more mooring space? Is that something you think plans
I don't
should look
think
at?
so, because really the decision is made on the arc and swing of the boat on the mooring, and I have to weigh that with the navigability of the waterway in general. Am I creating blank corners? Is it so congested that a larger passenger vessel won't be able to get through? Even if I don't think that the harbor line change, although I think it's a good idea for other reasons, would help with more moorings.
Okay.
There are more mooring spaces off of Gibson Island now.
All right, anything else from the committee?
Well, I do have one question. Do we have any space at all in Williams Creek?
Williams Creek is not that desirable. We have a couple of problems with Williams Creek. We probably need to revisit our MOU with the county because there are some weaknesses in that MOU that won't allow us to consider that until such time that we tighten that MOU up. So that's the first problem. And then the second problem is that Weems, as far as I can tell, hasn't been that desirable because until recently, we wouldn't have waiting lists there. And then when a ball would come open, it was harder to sell it. I think that is part and parcel of the problem with the MOU because there are still some private moorings that are installed on the county side, which if you look at the letter of Title 15, isn't really permitted. They would still need a permit through us. But I think that has decreased the demand because we haven't been able to do proper enforcement. I know that's a long answer. I apologize.
So is the boundary straight down the creek?
Technically, it is similar, pretty straight down the middle of the creek, but with the MOU, we have a jurisdiction to enforce all of Title 15 in that creek.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make a note to let Alderwoman O'Neill know that there is that issue, since that's primarily her ward, I think. Okay, so there is a motion on the floor, ready to vote. So all those in favor of the motion to recommend favorably as amended, I believe?
Yep.
All right. all
Aye.
those- Aye. Motion carries, unanimous. And do we need to vote on one final time? Ms. Green? Kind of did the amendment and the final vote at once. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. All right, thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Next up on the agenda is 01222 special events. And Ms. Guild, could you join us as well? And I know we discussed this at transportation. I don't know if the sponsor or anybody up front would like to just give us a briefing on the genesis of this legislation and.
I can do that. All right.
Thanks, Ashley.
So this is, and sorry to repeat myself for the transportation meeting that we were at where I said the same thing, but so essentially this has been about a year or so in the works. The initial genesis for this was the prior amendment to this section in which they added in the definition for city-sponsored events, but then didn't, from my legal perspective, didn't very clearly define that term, nor did they apply it throughout the whole chapter. So it created a lot of these gray areas about what was city-sponsored and what was not. So our first big change was to separate it into city-supported versus a city event. So a city event is like July 4th. Ms. Nolan plans it, she runs it, it's fully supported by the city, it is a city event. Then you have city supported, which is, it's being run by a third party, it's a third party event, but we might give some money or in-kind support for it. But it is not, but there's still a separate third party applicant who has to go through the application process and get approved and would have to cover various fees unless they are waived. So whereas a city event, no application, no fee waivers, because it's just ours essentially. So that was the first big change, was to try to separate that out through the entire chapter, not just in the definition section. The second one was to try and reduce the... Do you want me to wait?
Sure. Sorry. Thank you.
It's the city manager, yes.
That's fine. So the second one was try to reduce the workload on smaller community or block parties. So if they fit within a small enough footprint size, then they don't have to go through this whole application process. They can just get a public works road closure permit as needed. They don't have to provide all the insurance. They don't have to be vetted by all the various different departments. We have a lot of these on an annual basis. Many of them are repeating events, and because of their small nature, it just seemed inappropriate to have them go through the same full-scale process. And then the third...
But they still have to get a street closure permit.
Yes, they still have to get the street closure through. So they're still being permitted, but it's just a much simpler process for your neighborhood barbecue in a cul-de-sac type thing.
Are we going to do the form if we're kind of unsure?
Yes. Well, and internally we're working on forms to sort of, if we can't tell if it fits in one space or the other, they will fill out an informational form, and then the Office of Law with the Special Events Coordinator will determine sort of which basket they fall into. And we might also have police input on that as well. And then the third big one was mostly to just do a cleanup on this section. It had been a while since I think anyone had really looked at this chapter. So while we were in here, we just did some other updates to try and clarify things that that we have found working on it. I say
Over
with
the years.
yeah over close to a decade probably at
Lessons
this
learned.
point. That lessons learned that. So that's sort of it. It was sort of a main overhaul, but we are trying to just make it work better and more consistently fit with the rules and regulations that have been adopted.
The road
Make it work
race,
better for everybody.
should we mention the road races?
Oh, yeah, we can.
Yeah.
So did you want to explain that, or do you want me to explain the road races? So some of the road races fall into the count of like a major city dock, but they're literally there for
Less than 30 minutes.
less than 30 minutes because they're just starting there and then they go elsewhere.
They usually start,
Or do
they usually start at the Naval Stadium, and then they just come through town, and they're out of the historic district. They per code before 9 a.m., but I think most of them except for one, and there's a few, I think maybe like 4 or 5 total, and all of them except for one are out usually before 8 a.m. So it was it was becoming a lot for that to be considered a major city dock event where they're in town for less than 30 minutes and it's a rolling road closure. You know, once they're past a certain point, same kind of thing with a parade, once they're past a certain point, the road is open. And so there is one that begins at the city dock and ends at the stadium, the triathlon, and that one will still be considered a major city dock event since, yes, it's using parking, it's using city resources downtown, everything. But the main change for that was the count, keep counting it in the major city dock events, but every other aspect of it will continue. They still have to do the same notifications. They still have to be out of the historic district before 9 a.m. They basically they're a major event rather than a major city dock event. So they do have to follow the same procedures as they would have normally followed.
But it does allow, normally they'd be out of there by 9 a.m. and then you can't really do anything else that day. This would allow some other events to come in potentially later in the day because the first one is gone so early that it almost, and of course, it just based on experience is that the races don't really cause that many hiccups that you could have another event the same day without causing a lot of congestion or chaos down in the city dock area.
Right. And in saying all of this, we have not had any events to be added. This is just an opportunity if there are other large events that would maybe like to be in the city dock area. But just to clarify, this is not like opening it up to new events. We have not had any as of now, but it's just it was more kind of like a definition change.
And then,
Thank you. And I'd like to, this came to Environmental Matters presumably because it impacts Title 14. And I do want to kind of focus some of our questions, if we have any questions regarding the environmental potential impact. Now, there is one provision in there that addresses the environment. It requires, and I have to look it up, but it requires that the events basically have to comply with and provide the same level of waste management and recycling that the rest of the city has, and that the receptacles have to be near each other. Is that for all events or just certain types of events that would have to comply with that?
It's more for certain type of events. Definitely your major events have that requirement, but also events that would have, like if there's food, because there's also a lot of events that don't produce any sort of way, you know what I mean? It's just to be your normal every day. But something like a festival down at the city dock, would that have food trucks and there's, food, beverages, all that kind of stuff. They'd need somewhere to throw it away. So we do have that in, that's a part of the major city dock event, or major events rather. And then there are like stuff like the city events, like the events that we put on as the city, we'll make sure that's all provided. Public Works works with us. And also there are other, like how Ashley was saying about the city, support sponsored still, but moving to supported. That's usually can be a question asked of us as well. So if the city's providing them for these larger events too, that helps. But otherwise, it is the the applicant's responsibility to provide what is needed and for them to take and dispose of on their own, like not in a city receptacle, basically.
So I do have a specific issue I'd like to talk about, but anything from the committee? We're jumping into that. Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. They're not directly related to the environment, but they are in Title 14, and they could have some more general policy application. The first one is on page 8, and it is the appeal which forces people to go to the circuit court, which is a pretty onerous kind of thing for anybody to have to do. I know our Board of Appeals only hears titles 20, 21, and 22, but it does seem like there could be across the city and across all of the code, a less onerous appeals process. So I mean, clearly this is an amendment. Somebody has thought about it because it's in there, but generally it costs several thousands of dollars or more, which could be saying, we really don't want you to be able to appeal, but I don't think that's really what we should be doing.
It's actually more of a clarification. So it's not new language. The problem is the old B. So you had section 1418.090A. You do still have a written request for reconsideration to the city manager. So that's still in there. So you can still have it. The problem is in B is that after you have this reconsideration by the city manager, then you had an appeal to either the city manager or the circuit court, which just kind of seemed legally nonsensical to have an appeal to the city manager who just made the reconsideration process. So there is still a process where you can appeal Ms. Nolan's decision to the city manager, but then if you are going to appeal the city manager, rather than going back to the city manager, you would then have to go to court. So that's how.
But what I'm suggesting is, I understand that clarification, but there is a $450 filing fee to go to our Board of Appeals, which is made up of pure citizens, as opposed to going all the way to circuit court, which my understanding is the filing fees are actually less, but the legal costs are many, many-fold more. Like plan on $50,000 if you're going to spend any time in circuit court. That's a pretty big barrier for an average citizen to have to climb.
I'm honestly not aware of any events that we haven't resolved an issue where it's ever felt that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to speak for the Board of Appeals. I'm not their legal counsel. This would be expanding their jurisdiction. So I'm not sure
That's why I said,
if they want to take that on or not, and you would probably need to update that section of the code to allow them to have, because this would be a very different type of review than what they're normally doing.
yeah, I understand. That's why I said it has a broader policy implication. We'll see it in Title 15. I'm working on the revision of Title 15 with Frank Biba, and we're going to see it in other places. We saw it when we saw appeals going to the Building Board of Appeals for Title 17, even though it was something that really seemed like a Title 21 issue. So I think there's an overall, what kind of avenues are we allowing people to go to after meeting with the city manager, but before going to circuit court? And so that's why there's a broader, I'm glad that in fact, if we write in here, there will never be an unsuccessful remediation with the city manager.
I was just going to jump in and say, I've been in this position for 8.5 years, and I've never even had one that's needed to go to the city manager for the 14 days that it is. So, I mean, we normally, if there are, we'll say, issues with an event, we are usually pretty, we try to work hand in hand with everybody to get where we can get it to either something we will approve or, whether, however we're going to go back and forth with them. But we've never had anything that's even gone to
That's
the
why
city
we love you in the
manager.
job.
Well, that's good to know. 'Cause I was thinking to myself, well, we don't necessarily want to burden the city manager, but
Yeah.
it sounds like nothing
We
really goes to
haven't.
him
I
anyway.
mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, he definitely gets emails and calls for me, but it's nothing, it's nothing like this.
Did you have anything else?
The other one is on page 10, section 1418-140, which is the insurance. And that is something that has come to me. I don't remember the exact incident, but they were being asked to provide $3 million worth of insurance for one day, which I understand is actually pretty cheap to get. But this is fairly vague. It does put a lot on your shoulders, basically, because it's what you think are acceptable amounts.
There's actually, the amounts are set in the adopted rules and regulations, which is part of the application. So she's not coming up with the numbers. The numbers are set in the rules and regulations. And we are trying to make it, most one-day event policies are not that expensive. Most events of any sizable nature should be able to factor that into their costs. We do know there is some hardship, which is why we created the block. I think, what did we say?
Yep, I saw it.
Waiver.
Yeah, the block party definition, because those, frankly, the small little block parties are probably the ones we got the most issues with related to the insurance. Because if you have 20 neighbors getting together, that's very hard for them to get an insurance policy, because one neighbor is going to have to volunteer to be sort of the straw man, to put the policy in their name. So
And the weddings, if we have.
yeah, and
sometimes
sometimes little weddings. So we were trying to. Insurance is important because all sorts of stuff can happen at these big events. But over the last 8 years that Felicia and I have been working on it, we have tried to sort of carve out and reflect in these amendments what events really need the insurance and what events really don't need the insurance. And then there is still a waiver provision in there that can come up, but then they have to meet sort of the 4 criteria that were already previously spelled out in there.
And for the ones that, there are yearly events that will ask for the insurance waiver, and it is like a form that they fill out. And with that form, that goes directly to the city manager for his approval on that level. And the other, if I get a certificate of insurance from other events, that gets approval through the city attorney's office. So like when I get the waiver ones, I'll send it directly to the city manager. Then when he gives me the go-ahead, then I'll forward it to the city attorney, so he's aware as well. But like Ashley was saying, it's more like the really small events that are asking for waivers. I mean, some of these weddings are seriously, they're down there for under 20 minutes. I do, and it's over. And so a lot of them are kind of like, we're going through the process, we want to do everything right, but like, we don't want to spend $1,000 on insurance. So that's why this was created to begin with. And I think that in the change with the block party and the smaller event gatherings that was changed into the definitions, the insurance was a big portion of that, because it was kind of like, it's hard. I mean, a huge festival or a huge parade or a huge foot race, it's one thing. They most likely have insurance through their organization already, so it's easy for them to get it. But some of the other smaller ones, it can be difficult, especially for something that's under 30 minutes.
So it was a block party, a regular block party that I got the call from.
Yeah. And I think we ended up giving them a waiver.
And they still have, the waiver form has language in it that they're still taking responsibility and liability for the event. So it's not a complete let off the hook, but we are trying to make it a more reasonable ask for some of these smaller events.
And then a couple of the block parties, because we have several yearly block parties all over the city. And a couple of them have even kind of come up with their own form that they have each neighbor sign, and basically they'll submit that to me and just say, hey, our neighbors aren't going to sue the city if something happens, is basically what that is saying. So it's worked. I mean, it's worked. We haven't had any issues with it.
Thank you for those answers.
All right, Alderwoman, do you have anything?
I was just knocking on wood.
Yeah, I know. I do that daily.
But no, I think you've covered everything. Once you explained, what your objective was, I'm good with it. So, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we give a favorable recommendation to O-1222
I'd like to discuss one thing.
after we get it on the floor.
Yeah, sure, that's
Second.
fine. Thank you. So one thing I'd like to bring up, which I brought with Ms. Leonard already, is at the Transportation Committee, is something that I've been thinking about for a couple of years, is trying to get some of these special events to become certified as kind of green, sustainable events. We've had special event certification under our Sustainable Annapolis Environmental Stewardship Program since 2012. That was developed, I think, by Ms. Beard or Ms. Hodo. So what I would like is, I asked Ms. Leonard about the idea of basically putting something in the code, in legislation that would require a certain type of event. I'm not interested in the smaller, obviously, block parties, but the larger events that they would have to essentially get some amount of certification so that they are aware of some of the environmental commitments and make some changes on there, and to have these events have less of an impact environmentally. And so a couple questions come out of that. One would be, what's the best way to do that? Is it to put something in here that basically says that the following types of events will need to be certified through the stewardship program, and then just list kind of particular events, because they're pretty well defined in the legislation. So, for example, it could include city-sponsored events, major special events, major city dock events. So that's the one question, is what type of events. But the other one is should we do this, if the committee thinks it's a good idea, is this something we should do through the legislation? Or I think Ms. Leonard brought up the idea of maybe just doing it through the rules and regulations. And my only concern with that is just, as I mentioned over email, is just the having some continuity through administration. Some sort of makes it a bit stronger to have it be in the code. So that's kind of the idea I wanted to bring up. So I wanted to hear from the committee and also staff.
Alderwoman Tierney can go first if she like.
Well, first of all, the committee have any comments on that? Or do you want to hear?
Well, I'd like to know more about it, to be honest with you. I think in concept, it sounds good. My initial concern is we're forcing, and I don't know whether you're talking about making this a requirement for the event. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking fiscal impact, community impact. I just think there's some other things. We need to look deeper at the entire concept. I think if we could encourage everyone to be environmentally sensitive, absolutely. I just want to know how we would hold people accountable. I don't want this as a tool to discourage people. I want to be able to encourage them to do what we want them to do without doing it with a hammer. Mm-hmm. So that's my initial reaction.
Okay.
So we already do this at big things like the boat show. And actually at our block parties, we have 2 a year. People bring their own recycling bin, and we try to separate the kinds of trash. So at that small scale, I think it's being done. Trying to figure out, who are you thinking that we're missing? Presumably somebody in the middle, or some functions in the middle. The boat shows already do that, and we put it in a resolution, I believe it was, or is it in regs for the boat shows, that they have I think
Well,
the,
I think we did include, I think it was Alderman Lippman's initiative that says wherever there was a trash can, there was a recycle bin.
right.
And he was pretty consistent with his insistence on that with us. Because my question is, did the boat shows do it independently?
It's in their leases.
It's in their lease?
Right.
So, but I think that was Alderman Lippman's initiative to
Right.
make sure that if you had one, you had the other.
And I think after that got put into their lease, I think that's when we were working on the original 01614 for the special events, when we put it in there as well with the trash can and the recycling bin.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, I just, thank you for that, and thank you for being environmentally conscious. In looking at the list, we pretty much have a finite list of these events, and the majority of them being parades and festivals. And I'm just a little bit curious on how that would work, like for a parade. What would be the example of the application of that in a parade? What would that look like?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's to you.
Well, so, and I want to give Ms. Gall some time as well, but so this, going through the certification application, it's an entire book, and the total, right now, the way the book is written is an applicant would need 65 points to get the certification out of a total of 410 points available. And so just some example, there are a couple different sections to this workbook. There's administrative, and so in the administrative section, just as an example, they can get 10 points just simply for training staff through facilitated learning opportunities, recognizing vendors for their environmental stewardship, get 5 points. There are a couple of things like that. They have, let's see.
What are you referring to? Which book are you?
It's an environmental stewardship certification book that was created by
It's online.
by DNEP about 10 years ago. So there's a section on energy where they would have to, the generators would run on biodiesel, where don't leave doors or windows open where there's air conditioning or heat. Again, just as an example, there are a lot of items under these. Waste management section in terms of providing composting, they can get points for that, or reusable bags. There's a section on water quality and conservation. So they have where they sweep and broom off dust and trash instead of just washing into the city dock into Spock Creek. There's a transportation section, just ensuring that they probably maintain their vehicles and encourage carpooling, biking. There's a section on light pollution, section on merchandise and transactions, and air quality, which if they establish smoke-free policy, they can get 10 points. There's a food section, so on and so forth. Lots of things in here that they could choose. And so for a parade, it would be make sure staff are adequately aware that they would have of the policies that, in terms of making sure they have waste receptacles up, making sure that they sweep all the waste at the end of the parade instead of just washing it away. It could be if they have any vendors, making sure the vendors are following practices. That's kind of what it would look like. If that answers your question.
Yeah, but part B of that is this, that we do, and I'm not sure if I know the specificities of this, but we do have a pre-op meeting for some of these events where we all, meet in the OEM, and each department goes over the prep work for this, and one of those is DPW's to speak of the trash collection and all. So I'm not sure how that would interface with that.
Well, on that point, most of the parades are either city organized or city sponsored. And most of them, like Alderwoman Tierney was just saying, during these big meetings, and DPW takes care of all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of things do, you know, it would be case by case, but a lot will depend on the city's Public Works Department as well.
And Ms. Kyle, anything you want to say about?
Yes, so this program, Sustainable Annapolis, this certifies not only special events, but schools, residents, businesses, and if you get a certain amount of points, then you get a recognition sticker for your window, or you can put on, and it's to create behavior change and environmental awareness. And I think it's a laudable goal. It does need to be updated. It's pretty out of date. It still says DNEP on it. It still has Maria Broadbent's name on it, and Mayor Panellides' name on it as well. I think it should be updated, but what I think we really should be striving for with your idea of your amendment is zero waste, zero impact events. And I don't really think you achieve that through having groups certified through Sustainable Annapolis. Because there's a lot of things in here that, while they're behavior change oriented and they're laudable goals, as I said, such as training your staff to be more environmentally aware, using EV cars, sponsoring and volunteering environmental restoration projects by your group. Those are all great things, but they're not going to, on the day of the event, have an impact. And I think what we're trying to do is on the day of the event, not have an impact on our environment. So I tend to agree with, I believe Ms. Leonard said, is to go through a code revision about what is required at an event. For example, when we did the Gazette Memorial, I said we really don't need to have plastic that day. We ordered water in cardboard boxes. We didn't order enough, so we ended up having to get OEM to deliver their plastic bottles that they always had, but we had a lot of water in cardboard boxes. That's what we need to say at events. You need to have your water in recyclable containers, or better, in paper containers, no plastic bags. We need, that kind of thing. That's what we need to. Annapolis Green has a great list of how you do a zero impact, zero waste event. I think those are the kinds of requirements we need to be imposing for these larger events, and the city needs to be imposing on itself as well. That's how you get impact on the day of. And you don't see what we saw as much on St. Patrick's Day, with trash cans overflowing into the street with lots and lots of plastic and plastic bags and debris everywhere. I also did not see on that day a recycling container next to every single trash can. There were a lot of trash cans.
On what day?
On St. Patrick's Day at the parade. There were not recycling containers next to every trash can that I saw. And I walked around during the parade and afterwards, and there was a lot of trash on the street. So rather than requiring groups to meet the certification, because there's a lot of, you can get 65 points really quickly through this and not have an impact on the day of the event. I think we should have changes for what we require at events.
So it sounds like we'd have to narrow down the list of what kind of requirements we want to put in place. And the second question would be, what's the best way to do that? Is it include that into the code, to include that into maybe a resolution so it's included in the rules and regulations? Because I think that's a good point. We want to kind of be focused on the impacts we want to reduce. And I think primarily, like you said, be waste, to make sure that's not going to impact in our streets or waterways. But Ms. Nolan, so you just...
Yeah, just to kind of add to what Ms. Skild was saying about the, sorry, I'm having pregnancy brain right now. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. Oh, goodness. Okay, with the no plastic bags, recyclable water bottles, that can be all stuff. When I approve an event, I'll send them, the applicant, obviously a copy of their approved event, but it also have a full list of hey, this is what, you got to do this. If you have barricades, this. If you got police, here's that, whatever it is. We can always add something into the language that I send to them. But I think, this is just my 2 cents on it, but I think maybe something like you just mentioned, a resolution where it goes into rules and regs. I think that might I think that might work out nicely, because even, I know Alderman Tierney and I do a lot with the like parking regulations during city events and stuff like that. And I know the rules and regs has really helped with that. So I mean, just my 2 cents, I think something like that would work out nicely. And then we could sit down together and put a list together. I do know that other events have requested to talk with Annapolis Green. Like I have forwarded several events to them, and I know they people are doing what they can, what they can. But I think if we had just like a list of what it is, I do agree with you that on the day of, especially for these temporary, just like quick special events, outdoor events, I think something like that would work out nicely.
Yeah, I could see that working, especially since you said there's already a sit down with Public Works and presumably the other agencies.
Well, especially large events.
Where they could bring up, in particular, the waste management, because it just seems like, so on the large events, for example, St. Patrick's Day, it sounds like they just didn't have sufficient waste management, perhaps. I
also, with St. Patrick's Day, I'm not giving anybody a pass on anything, but St. Patrick's Day was also like the first like huge event back in the city, like after winter, after everything. I mean, I think even the coordinators didn't expect as many people as came down to St. Patrick's Day. I just think it was kind of like a supply and demand kind of just thing that day. It was very, very crowded. Even this past couple weeks ago, we had the Martin Luther King parade. Same sort of thing. It was a much larger crowd than what anybody was anticipating, but it is kind of like everybody's excited to be out again, do stuff again. So we are on these same sorts of notes, though. We have been making, we have lists after every event. We do like an after action, and we will put them towards, we'll take what we learned to go towards the next event. Because I mean, there's definitely the two things you can't control, and that's the weather and how many people actually are going to come to an event. And they're just, you gotta go with what you got too. So if there's stuff we do like preventing and being on the proactive side, but sometimes we are at the reactive side too.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, because our events are mostly public comes. And, we don't send out invitations to the public like we could, at the Rotary Club. What do they do? And that's like a net zero. They do a great job because everybody knows going to that they're going to be net zero. It's out there. So on these events, it's really up to us, the city, to really reinforce, at our pre-op meetings, you got to get those recycle bins, because, how are you going to tell somebody coming from Washington, D.C. not to bring their plastic bottles, because they will bring their plastic bottles, It's a tough one, because it's all, it's all public coming in. So it's
and just in saying that, like, if we do have these, when we have these big meetings, and it is something like that, that's actually, I just made a note of it because I didn't know that with the recycling bins for St. Patrick's Day. So that's something we can move forward. And it's also the sort of thing, if I know our Public Works Department will help in any way they can with these, especially these large city-sponsored events. So I know if it's something that I'm aware of, we'll make it happen. We'll make it happen, because I know the MLK, the festival that was down at the city dock after the parade needed extra. Well, we found out after the fact that they would have needed more trash and recycling bins, and we already have it on our notes to make sure for next year that they've got the trash and recycling bins that they need. So, I mean, like I was just saying, we don't like being reactive, but a lot of times we have to be. So we'll see how events keep going, if they keep trending in the high, what's the word I'm looking for? High attendance that we've seen already so far this year in 2 large events.
Okay.
And we've got several more coming up. So.
Okay. Well, so what's the sense of the committee? Because could either A, do the try to push for some kind of requirements in the code, or B, take what staff is recommending, which essentially would be come back some point with a resolution that would identify a couple of areas that we want to essentially have staff work into the rules and regs to work with the applicants on improving waste or whatever, reducing runoff or clean, renewable energy, something. I don't know. We could develop a list later. I'm kind of leaning towards B, but I don't know what the sense of the committee is.
Do you have an amendment in mind for this legislation?
Well, no. I mean, generally, yes, it would have required that some of the larger events would have to comply, get certified. But like Ms. Giles said, the program is dated and may, miss some of the key points, the important sustainable points that we really want to promote. Which, so I think it may be worthwhile just to put this on our to-do list to kind of.
I like that at this point. I think I understand where that's headed, and I think that it could be taken care of through amendments to rules and regs rather than hard code it. I guess I'm a little concerned about the overflows from the parades, and that almost seems like it's more of a staff or management issue than the legislative issue, but I'm not sure of that either. So I like where you're going, but I'm not sure we're ready in terms of this piece of legislation to do anything right now.
Yeah, and I think to the Alderwoman's point, Finlayson, that I think the second approach would certainly allow for, I think, a bit more of a softer approach to just enable staff to work with the applicants to accomplish our sustainable goals, so to speak.
I think so. And from what I heard Ms. Nolan say, she's already been doing some of that, and that she could add to the list of expectations that we give them. I do have a question. Is Public Works prepared to handle putting recycled bins at every trash can in the city? Because that's what we're asking them to do for something like the
We'd have to
parade.
definitely look into that.
So
we'd have to look into that.
That's something that, we need to work on and needs to be funded.
Yeah, I know they have,
supplies.
I know they have a lot. I know a lot of times we more focus on that with like a festival, rather than not to say it like that, but like rather than the parade, because like the festival is that event is what's creating the food, not the amount of people downtown stopping in and getting ice cream or stopping in and getting a soda from or whatever it is from somewhere. So I know in like the festival capacity, we haven't had any issues with providing a trash and a recycling bin. So it would we'd have to find out about like parade route kind of stuff, but at least at the stuff that we know is producing the waste, we've had that available in the past. I haven't heard any issues with it.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that I know you do have an after action, meeting, so you have an opportunity to learn from lessons, and you're doing that. So I would agree that we should let staff see what they can come up with, and if we need a resolution, we'll have it. Thank you.
Yes, that sounds good. Thank you, Alderwoman. So yeah, if staff has any, I guess if Ms. Nolan and Ms. Gog could put your heads together at some point, if there are additional recommendations, requirements for the rules and regs that you think would be worthwhile for the council to support in a resolution, please let us know, because I think there is value in having the resolution, which will be in place by the council and help give you support through working with the applicant on those kind of things.
I'm really good at hand holding, so this will, and what's it called, going back and forth. So I'll take care of it, whatever it is, with the applicants.
All right. Thank you. Is anything else from the committee?
We voted,
Do we
right?
have another
No.
piece of, no, we don't
We
have
still have a
to.
motion to act on.
Oh, okay, that's right. So,
So I think the motion's been moved and seconded, so no second yet?
I
Okay.
second it.
I think you did. So all those in favor of recommending 01222 favorable to the rest of the council, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you for joining us today. Next up on the agenda, we have R1922, Water Service Agreement for 1049 Chesapeake Harbor Drive. And I don't know if Ms. Leonard's here for this one too. This is actually right next to my ward. It's actually in the county though, county property who, I think this is the one that contacted me initially. I think with a request to, they're having failing water.
Yes,
Well,
so
right.
they have a failing well, there we go. They're in the county, they're right outside the Chesapeake Harbor development, but they're not part of Chesapeake Harbor. So that, as far as I'm aware from Director Johnson and Public Works, there's really no other good alternatives for them to get water anywhere else, and they are sort of approaching an urgent crisis point for water service. Sorry.
Excuse me, could you move the conversation outside for a minute? Thank you.
So it's an urgent scenario where they are losing their current water source. There really is nowhere else to go to get it, and they're willing to enter into this agreement. They would pay at the increased rates as specified in the city code for water service. But they're willing to do that, and Public Works has been working with them directly to make sure that it will be a smooth transition and they don't have any concerns with adding them to our water system. And I believe they uploaded the site plan onto Legistar of late. They did accept a slightly, I don't want to say lower quality, but a simpler site plan due to financial constraints.
Have we always required that people who are outside the city limits pay a rate 3 times the city water? Has it always been 3 times?
Yes. That's unless they get annexed in at some point, and then obviously it stops. Yes, that's always been what it has been set at. We did remove recently some other fees that were associated with it, but that has been and I think it's 3 times for water, 2 times for sewer based on city costs for what it would be to deliver it.
Okay.
I move that we recommend favorably to the city council.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. I do have a question. I know we voted, and that's fine. It's not going to impact my vote. But there are several houses on Harbor, whatever.
Chesapeake Harbor has a
Chesapeake Harbor Road.
grandfathered different settlement provision that has a whole big box of history related. So they do get a different rate. They get 2 times, I believe, but that is a grandfathered specific
Is that the
instance.
Cars family or the Sparrows family?
It's the Chesapeake Harbor development, the specific parameters.
Well, they pay 3 times the rate.
No, that Chesapeake Harbor, I believe, only plays 2 times.
I think we just changed that, didn't we?
It
Anyway,
was
that's
3,
it.
but we
It was
changed it.
3, but based on a lot of research that I was involved in as well as others, it had to be adjusted.
Okay.
But
so-
that's a specific grandfathered, like I said, lots of boxes and papers to go through. You're welcome.
I remember there was some
Yeah,
pending legal
that's sort of
action
the
for
outlier.
that. Well, my question is, will there be other families or other property owners?
I don't think there are any other homes near this particular one that are without water service, but I'm not positive on that.
Maybe not directly connected, but there is the Cars Beach Road, is it, or Cars Road? There's a community that has, I don't know, maybe like a dozen homes or so.
That leads to into
And-
Chesapeake Harbor, right? That's what I was thinking.
Can't remember.
as
Well, it's kind of surrounded by the city, but for some reason, well, I think you can probably guess why. But the community was not annexed into the city. There is discussion with some residents about getting that land annexed.
This is part of the old Cars and Sparrows Beaches.
Yeah, this particular home I think is a little removed from that. When I saw the site plan, I don't think there's any other houses directly near it. From my understanding, it's sort of out by itself.
Do we have I'd like to see a map just for.
I think they were supposed to put it on Legistar. I think Jacqueline Lee said she put it up with with the piece of legislation. But if not, I can forward it to all of you.
I would just like to see the map, to be honest with you.
Is it, oh, yeah, there, here, I can bring it up if you want. It doesn't show the surrounding area, but.
What road is that? That's,
This Chesapeake Harbor.
yeah, okay, that's what, there are several houses. They may not all sit back like, because several of them are pretty, not close to the road, but
Yeah.
they're very visible on the road.
Yeah, and so it would be right around this area, one of these homes. But I guess down to the south, this Cars Road is the one county. So these are the homes that are in discussion about trying to get annexed, but they have to do a sewer.
It hasn't come to me as of yet.
Oh, it hadn't? I thought.
But they might, I mean, sometimes people need one, sometimes they need both. In this case, this house only needs water. Sometimes we have to do sewer and water, but unfortunately, one goes resolution, one goes ordinance. Don't know why.
Yeah, and this is something which I think will come to the committee, because that, in particular, the Cars Road, those homes also have, some of them have, I think, failing wells, but also failing septics, which is obviously an environmental impact. So there would be in the city's interest to try to get those properties annexed at some point. So hopefully that'll come back to the council in the future. I'll have to get with you afterwards to see if.
It might have gone to the city attorney and just not come to me, so.
Okay. I'll make a note to follow up on that. Any other questions on this particular property? Well, the motion already passed, so I guess we could move on to anything else?
Nope, that was it.
In the committee? All right. So moving on to the last item, thank you. I think we're.
We shall see. I will wait a moment.
Okay. So we're going to turn now to Ms. Gobb for an update on sustainability resilience work.
So I just want to, I don't know that, maybe Alderman Arnett has heard this because he was at the Eastport Civic Association meeting, but.
Are your wounds healed?
It wasn't that bad. So there is a new grant that we just applied for on last Thursday. It was kind of a quick opportunity that came to our attention through BG&E, this Department of Transportation grant funds for an equitable multimodal hub and in the Eastport Terrace Harbor House redevelopment location. And so what this hub would be a area of a parking lot that would be on the far side of the community that's also accessible to the rest of Eastport businesses and residents, that would provide about 5 DC fast chargers for electric vehicles, 10 to 12 L2s, and also an EV bike and EV scooter docking stations. And this grant is we applied for a little over $2 million to build the hub. And it comes at a good time for the redevelopment project as well, because it's much easier to build infrastructure for EV charging at the same time that you're building an actual structure and redoing the parking lot, et cetera. So the timing is really good. And it does not have to be completed until 2031. So it works well with the redevelopment project. This grant is geared to communities that would not, lower income communities, historically disadvantaged communities that may not have access to electric vehicles otherwise. So even though some of the residents may not drive or own a car, they could use an EV bike or an EV scooter to get to work, to get to recreation, to the library, to get to the grocery store. We also included in that grant some dedicated electric cars to the neighborhood that they could use, and building those in cost-free to the residents, and also building in some workforce development with training to be Lyft drivers and dedicating some electric vehicles to those drivers to use for Lyft, and workforce development through training on how to maintain the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we worked with BG&E to develop the whole concept and with HACA, and we just sent in that application. We would find out probably early September, October, if those grant funds come to the city.
That's great. That sounds like an intriguing idea with the incorporating some Lyft, Uber opportunities, or even some kind of car share where they could use that for transportation. That's great. Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Gao, could you explain again? I didn't understand most of what you were saying.
Okay.
So would you translate it into layman's terms? What is it that you are proposing to put a hub for?
So
I think I heard you
it's
say
all
you-
it's electric vehicle support. So there would be electric bikes and electric scooters, as we're proposing in other locations in the city, but there would be two units dedicated just to that area, to that location. And electric vehicle charging, so cars. So there would be DC fast chargers, which are the ones that charge your car in 20 minutes from no charge to all the way charged. And then the level 2 chargers are the slower chargers. So one level 2 can accommodate 2 cars. We're talking 10 to 12 level 2s, so up to 22 cars. The DC fast chargers can only accommodate 1 car at a time. We're proposing 5 of those. So it's about 32 spaces. So people who live in Eastport, and we've had a lot of difficulty locating chargers in Eastport due to narrow streets and locations. So residents who have electric vehicles could charge at this location, as well as residents of the Eastport Terrace and Harbor House communities. And people who don't have cars, where we will be dedicating, I think we've proposed 3 in that grant, electric vehicles dedicated to that community for them to use free of charge. And the residents could use the electric scooters and the electric bikes free of charge.
And where is this being proposed for?
For the Eastport Terrace Harbor House redevelopment. So we looked at several different, we did a tour walk with BG&E because they have to think about where they get their power from and where infrastructure needs to be located to support it. So we did a site walk around Harbor House and with HACA, and we talked about different locations we could do that. The one area that seemed the most inviting and visible was the far border. I can't remember what street that is that runs along the back of Harbor House.
Monroe?
I think
President?
I think it's President. I think it's President. We thought that would be more visible to people who don't live there as well, so that they can see that there's electric charging there. Because part of the program is this has to be available not only to the residents of the community, but to other people, as to support a large community. But this particular grant, why they call it an equitable multimodal hub, and the multimodal means it's cars, trucks, bikes, scooters, that's the multimodal part of it. The equitable piece is that this particular grant is made to accommodate and support communities that are historically low income.
And so what they will have access to is vehicles, scooters, bikes, all free of charge.
Yes.
And they can just take them and come back whenever they want, or is that?
I'm not exactly sure how all the logistics of the electric scooters work and the bikes, but I don't believe there's a time limit on how long you can have them.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure. You're welcome.
Anything on this? All right.
Okay. And then I wanted to update you on the composting work as well. The city had a 6-month composting curbside collection pilot program going on in Hunt Meadow from October through the end of March, where through our contractor Annapolis Compost, the city offered free collection service of compost at the curb. So we collected about 20,000 pounds in that 6-month period. 80 out of 300 households participated. About 40 households decided to continue to participate as paying customers of Annapolis Compost at that location. And we had a lot of favorable comments that they would like to see curbside composting continue. Other residents in the city, when they heard about the pilot program, because we did do a press release when we started, wanted to learn when we would do composting in their neighborhoods as well or citywide. At the same time that we had the 6-month pilot program going on, we also had the city also had a drop-off location for food scraps located in the Truxton Park parking lot by the skate park and by the boat ramp. So that was going on for the same 6-month period. Annapolis Green had a grant to run that program and partnered with the city for the location and just support in making it known through social media, et cetera. Now, since we ended the curbside program, there was a lot of feedback to both the city on the curbside program and how much people liked the drop-off location. So I worked with Director Johnson in Public Works to continue the drop-off location in Truxton Park. So anyone in the city who's a food waste collection customer can go to that location and dispose of their food scraps. And we continued that collection process with our contractor, Annapolis Compost.
Yeah, how many, you said out of, how many originally participated?
In the curbside collection program in Hunt Meadows, 80 households out of 300 participated, and roughly half, or around 40 households, continued as paying customers of Annapolis Compost. Now, the other location, the drop-off location, we don't monitor or require sign-in for how many people are coming there. However, Annapolis Compost is going to have a lock on the bins, and to get inside the bins at the drop-off location, there will be a number you text to, and you receive a code message back, and you just enter that code onto the lock, and then you can access it. And that's just so that we don't have animals opening the bins. We had run this program from October to March during the winter months when there wasn't a lot of smell coming from the bins during the cold winter weather months. But we think that might be more attractive to rodents and other wildlife as the weather warms up. So we had, Annapolis Compost had this idea that they would be locking, and once you get the code via text, you just put that in and you can open the bin and put your waste in there. Now, with that system, Annapolis Compost can monitor better, like how many times it opens. So we can start to monitor how many trips, how many disposal trips there are. They can measure weekly how many pounds we're picking up from that location and translate that into methane and other greenhouse gas emissions we avoid by not putting the waste into a landfill.
Yeah, and I'm glad that some of the finance committee members are here, because it would be good conversation to have with Public Works as far as what the plan is moving forward with the compost program. Because I think there are I have a number of questions. First would be, is this something that the city may want to look at putting out for a bid, essentially, to have Annapolis Compost or whoever puts a bid run our composting program? Or two, if we do this ourselves, I imagine there should be call savings associated with this, right? I think if people are composting, they're diverting waste away from our regular waste stream and putting it with the compost, so they'd be producing less. And I know this has come up over the years periodically. I know that some jurisdictions weigh wet residence trash, or they have trash trucks that can actually do that. They pick up the container and weigh it while they pick it up and put it in the vehicle. And then they, I guess, charge the resident accordingly. I could see the program working well with that, because then again, it could be essentially a cost neutral item, right? It would be saving some money. They'd be charged less for traditional waste, and then they'd be charged a little bit for composting. But I'm not sure if we're moving in that direction or not with our Public Works trash collection.
First of all, let me just inform you that this program, to continue the drop-off site, will cost the city about $4,800 a year, and we're using our solid waste fund to do that, to fund it. It's about $400 a month, so it comes out to $4,800 a year. According to the Department of Public Works, composting, if we did it citywide, would not save us a tremendous amount of money. You still would have transportation costs. It does divert waste from the landfills, so we're not using the space in the landfills quickly, and it does reduce the methane emissions and other emissions from the landfill. So there's environmental benefits. There's not a great deal of cost saving. Now, if we went full scale composting the yard waste, composting the wastewater sludge from the water treatment center, then there would be some savings in transportation costs. We wouldn't be carting our waste out to PG County. It would be going to what's been proposed as a composting facility near the solar park in that area. We would need participation from the county to make that viable, because we would need a certain amount of waste in order to make a composting facility viable. And Department of Public Works continues to have those conversations with the county, but so far the county has not agreed to participate with the city. They have contracts with their various contractors and facilities, and they find it more cost effective to do their waste disposal that way. But Marsha Patrick is heading this effort up, and Public Works, she hasn't given up. But that is the direction most cities are going, is curbside composting, along with recycling and general waste collection. And it's something that the Department of Public Works has done a study with Jim Pittman. They have a proposal and what it would take to do. Basically, what we need is the county's participation.
And Alderwoman Tierney?
Yes, I'm giddy. That program is so welcomed from my constituents. I was so surprised. A lot of it was, they knew about it without me really announcing it. I know Mitchell has done some press releases,
Yes.
but I must have sent them out. And so when it stopped, I was getting all these emails about where is it, because they were comparing with Annapolis Compost, which I think is about $20 a month, or might have raised a little bit. And some of their, I hope they're not listening, but sometimes their pickups were inconsistent and all that kind of stuff. So this was super convenient. And now they're so spoiled, excuse me, but they're asking if they could get the compost once it's composted, understanding that that's down the line. I thought that was interesting for their gardens. But but that's a long way of saying thank you for continuing that program.
It has not stopped, so it never stopped.
It never stopped. Or
Right, I think
they thought it was going to stop.
because Annapolis Green had been running it through Veterans Compost, the drop-off location that is.
Okay.
And the city continued
Okay,
the same program,
that's
so there was
right.
never a lapse in service.
Okay.
Veterans Compost is still picking up through the month, and then we switch over to
These are the
Annapolis
ones that
Compost next month.
They'll drive to.
Right.
drive.
And Annapolis Compost is taking the food scraps right now. They're taking them to a nonprofit located in Edgewater called Wild Kid Acres, and they're composting there. And that farm, it's a regenerative, sustainable farm, is using the compost to amend their soil. Before it was, there's a lot of sandy soil, a lot of debris. They couldn't really grow grass or forage for the animals there. And they're also at one of the tributaries of the Western Road River. So that soil that is now growing grass and other plants is holding the soil in place. They have less erosion and pollution into the river there. So it's doing a number of good things. I don't know if we continued to, if we expanded citywide.
Right, that's what I
that
said.
one facility couldn't take all the compost. I know the Veterans Compost, they take their food scraps and compost it on site in Millersville and other locations, and then they sell it as a product.
Doesn't
as
it take a
amendment.
while to do that? Or maybe not. Annapolis Green does that with the pumpkins.
Yeah,
I don't know what the process is, but it takes a while, I thought.
it depends on the process
is.
that you
Yeah.
use.
Okay.
And it can take, several months to develop compost.
So I just recommend telling your residents, because you'd be surprised how many want to participate in that. They don't trust their garbage disposal anymore. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else from the committee on that? All right.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to?
And then
highlight?
we continue to work with BG&E on putting electric vehicle infrastructure throughout the city in different locations. As I mentioned, it's a little difficult in Eastport, so this equitable multimodal hub would be a good location in Eastport. We've talked about doing it at the Eastport Shopping Center as well. That would have to be arranged as a kind of a out-of-the-box kind of arrangement, because we usually do this on city-owned, operated, or leased property rather than private property. We tried a location at the Maritime Museum, but they determined that their parking lot was too small. But we do have plans to put electric vehicle chargers at the Maritime Museum on Back Creek. So this would be in the larger parking lot there, that would be across from the Cars Beach property. So we could see that being used even more by people that might drive to that location to use the Cars Beach property. They could charge in that parking lot. And we had already decided that it was a good location before the Cars Beach acquisition went through anyway. So
Excellent.
those are the major things we've been working on.
Great. Any questions for Ms. Guild?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have a question, but I'd like to speak to you afterwards, if you
Okay.
don't mind. Another project.
Okay. Alrighty, I think that's concludes our agenda. Anything else for the good of the order?
No, Mr. Chair, I'll move to adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.